You should not be afraid of disagreeing with your government. Your government should be afraid of disagreeing with you.
The first thing I would like to say is what are and what is a weapon of mass destruction. A weapon of mass destruction is the depleted uranium, which means that babies being born today in Iraq are born with two heads. Babies are born with one arm, are born with incredible deformities.
You know, a study recently came out that the effects of the depleted uranium and the white phosphorus on Fallujah are worse than the effects of the nuclear bombs and atomic bombs they dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Worse.
Now we have to ask ourselves a question, us in comfortable London, surrounded as we are by police and everything else. Would we accept that for our children? And why is it we expect other people to accept that for theirs? It's really simple. Do you think unmanned drones are weapons of mass destruction? Unmanned drones which are dropping bombs on Yemen, on Somalia, on Pakistan, on Afghanistan, on Libya, on Iraq. That is a weapon of mass destruction. And all of this talk about democracy, let me ask you a question. Is a country that goes to war and sends its sons to kill and die against the will of a majority of its population, is that democracy? When over 1 million people take to the streets and tell you, we don't want you to do this, and you go ahead and you do this. Does this equal democracy? And we can sit here so convinced of our own supremacy, so convinced of the own supremacy of our own humanity, as if we are more human than other people. With our arrogance, this is being done in our name. What is wrong with us? How have we allowed this to become so normal and normalized? Shame upon us for allowing this to take place and living with this. We need to understand that humanity is one body. Humanity is one body. We are not independent of any other part of that body, much less living in the country which defined the borders of Afghanistan over 100 years ago and defined the borders of Iraq less than 100 years ago. We are independent from no one. We have to take this in our own hands and take control of this situation, because it is clear there are people who are working against the interests of humanity. And they talk about democracy in the Middle East and dictatorships in the Middle East. The biggest dictator in the Middle East, who has imprisoned the most people, who has ethnically cleansed the most people, who has displaced the most people, who has murdered the most people, has a name. That dictator is called the State of Israel. You talk about democracy in Arab countries. If you had democracy in Arab countries, not one of the governments would be pro-Israeli. Not one of them. When we look at the history of the United States in relation to democracy in the quote-unquote third world, what happened to Mossadegh? He wanted to nationalize what is now the BP, British Petroleum. What happened to this man? What happened to Allende? What happened to Lumumba? What policies are they now pushing against Mr. Chavez, Mr. Morales in Bolivia, Mr. Carrera in Ecuador? These are democratically elected leaders, and because their policies are reflecting the will of the people, they are going against the wishes of the United States and the CIA. It's not complicated. It's not complicated.
Well, Chavez took on the elites and the oligarchs of Venezuela who had been responsible for installing military regime after military regime, all U.S.-backed over many years. And, of course, the anti-Chavez feeling is coming from the very wealthy elites of Venezuela. What's happening. The world is now realigning for a post-American, single superpower world. This country is broke. It's going into economic collapse. China is holding a lot of the economic cards now on our debt, amongst other things.
Bolivia's left-wing president looks to be on course for a landslide second term, as exit polls suggest he secured over 60% of the votes. Evo Morales is fiercely anti-US, along with fellow Latin American President Hugo Chavez of Venezuela. Morales is already pledging to speed up his radical reforms, including strengthening state control.
It really tells a lot about the relationship is that countries like Bolivia are looking to Russia for leadership in the world, and they don't feel so alone anymore. Morales is not very good friend of the United States, needless to say. Venezuela isn't either. But even countries like Argentina are looking more and more to Russia as a partner in trade, in energy. They want to determine their own foreign policies. They want to have their own agendas that are not forced upon them.
But the likes of Morales and Chavez are seen by many critics as a threat to the stability in Latin America. These very strong leftist revolutions that are
breaking the
occurring.
hegemony of the United States in the Western Hemisphere, I think that's a good idea. Why can't every country have their own foreign policy? Why do they have to kowtow to the regional power?
And if people really want to know who owns Obama today, just ask Jeremiah Wright.
We bombed Hiroshima, we bombed Nagasaki, and we nuked far more than the thousands in New York and the Pentagon, and we never batted an eye. We have supported state terrorism against the Palestinians and black South Africans, and now we are indignant because the stuff we have done overseas is now brought right back into our own front yards. America's chickens are coming home to roost.
Have you spoken with him since he's been in the White House?
You ain't gonna let him talk to me. I told my baby daughter, I said, he'll talk to me 5 years from now when he's lamed up, for 8 years when he's out of office.
If you had anything to say to him, what would you say to him?
Same thing I've said to him all along. Let being in politics change who you are as a person. Once you start compromising your beliefs, you become a puppet of a political machine you no longer yourself.
Well, Reverend Wright also says he doesn't have any regrets over his severed relationship with President Obama, but he says the president made mistakes and some bad choices.
Just ask Ali Abu Nima.
President-elect Obama, in his speech to AIPAC last June, pledged that the United States would, over the next decade, provide at least $30 billion in military and economic aid to Israel, including providing Israel with enhanced access to NATO weaponry, so that Israel would have the same access to weapons technologies as member states of NATO.
Let me be clear. Israel's security is sacrosanct. It is non-negotiable. The Palestinians need a state. The Palestinians need a state that is contiguous and cohesive, and that allows them to prosper. But any agreement with the Palestinian people must preserve Israel's identity as a Jewish state with secure, recognized, defensible borders. And Jerusalem will remain the capital of Israel, and it must remain undivided.
Just ask the Chicago activists who are now getting harassed by the FBI, who are getting subpoenaed, who are getting their houses raided. These are people that knew Obama before in his Chicago days, and they will tell you who owns Mr. Obama. He is still a servant to AIPAC, 100%. It would play into the interests of people who BAE Systems, precisely, as a arms manufacturer, profit every single day there is war. In times of war, they profit. Of course, it's in the interests of BP, who have huge interests in the region. Zionism isn't about self-determination. Zionism is about colonialism, imperialism, and ethnic cleansing. Never let them lie to you. Never let people make you feel ashamed for being an anti-Zionist or for opposing Zionism.
What is the most resilient parasite? Bacteria? A virus? An intestinal worm? An idea? Resilient, highly contagious. Once an idea has taken hold in the brain, it's almost impossible to eradicate. An idea that is fully formed, fully understood, that sticks.